All right, we're back, and we're going to talk about gender in this segment. Um, in the world of psychology, we use the word gender to describe the psychological perspective that a person has about what it means to be a biological male or biological female. Like, what behaviors should go along with that? What should I like and dislike as a function of that? We talk about gender as a socialized construct. If we're going to talk about sex differences, we use the word sex. So when I say how different are boys and girls, the word boy and the word girl is referring to these sex categories, male and female. When I talk about gender, I'm talking about the socialized differences that we might see between males and females. But let's talk a little bit about. So here's my little graphic that shows you, sex differences. We would talk about. So if we say that boys and girls are different from each other, we're talking about sex differences. If I were to say masculine and feminine people are different from each other, I'm talking about gender differences. That's the psychological component, the part that the person has internalized what it means to have those biological differences. So, sex differences. Very consistently, research has shown that boys are more physically aggressive than girls. So that is, and this is cross culturally true. It's been true across as long as we've had psychology, that boys are more physically aggressive than girls. And we're talking about 2 to 6 year olds. So boys are more physically aggressive than girls. Girls, on the other hand, are more empathetic from very early on. Um, all around the world, we see that girls are more empathetic. They maintain eye contact more. They are concerned when someone else is upset more often than boys are. Much less likely to hit, much less likely to bite, um, things like that. So, even in the very early ages, 2 to 6, that we're talking about, we see sex differences in aggression and empathy between boys and girls, males and females. So, sex identity refers to the child's awareness of whether they are male or they're female, and then their ability to label other people as males or females. So, recognizing that there is something consistent that makes boys boys and girls girls is what we're talking about here. So, all of us adults know that fundamentally what makes a male is, an XY chromosome, external genitalia, like these are the requirements for being male. And that to be female, you have XX and internal genitalia, reproductive organs for sure, and most of the genitalia are internal. Um, and of course, we talked a little bit about how some people have different chromosomal patterns, but on average, we're talking about XY versus XX. So we know that it's really about basically genitalia that determines the biological sex of a person. 2 to 6 year olds are not completely clear on that. Um, a 2 year old may be cueing on superficial factors that make mommy different from daddy, or that make uncle different from auntie, or some character in a cartoon, and so they'll focus on things like hair length or style of dress or other superficial things that we all know are completely changeable and that can vary by society. But they'll cue in on that and they'll say, well, the only people I ever see wearing skirts in my world are female, so I'll say that's a female. And the only people I see with short hair in my world are male, so I'll say that that person's a male, right? And they'll cue on those very superficial things. Somewhere around age 4, children start to recognize that there's something fundamental. They may not be completely aware of exactly what it is, but something fundamental and consistent is different between males and females. So it takes to about age 4 for them to realize that there's something underlying that. Sex constancy is the term that we use for the child's awareness that a person's sex doesn't change. That even if I take daddy and I put him in a long haired wig and put makeup on his face and put a dress on him, he's still male, right? That you can't change a person's sex by changing superficial cues. So you can dress up for fun. You can do these kind of like we talked about with the cat wearing the dinosaur costume, right? The cat might look different right now, but it's still a cat. And really, about that same time that they recognize that the cat is still a cat, even if it might look different right now, they start to realize that a male is still a male and a female is still a female, even if they're looking different right now. So, sex constancy is something that emerges during this early childhood period. It's not something that we're born with, and it's something that, on average, will appear around age 4. So Kohlberg, who we talked about in the cognition chapter, having his moral ladder, he also talked about stages of understanding gender. Now, just to qualify this, put a little asterisk, it's up too high, but Kohlberg used the term gender where today we would use the word sex. And when I say today, I don't mean recently. I mean ever since I've been in psychology, which is since the Dark Ages. I got my bachelor's degree in psychology in 1988. So I'm talking, been around the block a while. And the entire time that I've been in psychology, we have used the word gender to mean the socialized component that is your psychological internalization of your sex, or what it means to be your sex. And we've used the word sex to refer to the biology. So this is not a new thing. This is something that psychology has always been very specific, and apparently Kohlberg came well before that time because he called it gender. Carl Jung called it gender. He was a follower of Freud. I mean, so back in the old days, they said gender, in part because I think a lot of people use the word gender when they mean sex because the word sex sounds like sex, and people don't like to say it. It'd be nice if we had another word that was separate. If we had another word for well, we do have another word, but nobody likes to use it because we use the word sex when we actually mean coitus. So if we would use coitus, like Sheldon on Big Bang Theory, then we would free up the word sex to mean biological sex, and then we could all have normal words, but we don't have that. So this is what we're doing. So I just wanted you to know that he's using the word differently than we would use it. So anyway. So 2 or 3 year olds tend to label people by gender, but they are doing it based on the superficial things. By 4 to 5, they're starting to realize that gender is constant. The thing is, they still take into consideration appearance and might make incorrect labeling of people because they are cueing in on those superficial things. They may resist having their hair cut for fear that it'll make them look like the other sex. They might be like, no, only boys have short hair, or no, I don't want to have long hair because girls have long hair. They might say stuff like that because they still kind of are not entirely sure of exactly what makes them whatever sex they are. By 6 or 7, according to Kohlberg, they start to realize that across time, across situations, across everything, the person's sex is constant. So I like to say by 4, they're starting to have this concept of it, but it probably is still kind of tenuous, even as they get older. Now, in the current milieu, so I told you, psychology has talked about these things for my entire career. Kohlberg was talking about this, in the 40s and 50s. In the modern last 5 years, there's been this whole turning on its head discussion about little kids and what they actually understand when they say something like, I'm a girl now, or no, I'm a girl. As if a 3 or 4 year old, or even a 5-year-old, understands the implications of saying I'm a girl now. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about as they're developing what's called sociodramatic play, where they can do pretend. At the very time when they can imagine that they could be anything, I'm a butterfly, I'm a construction worker, I'm whatever, we know that they're pretending, and we're lauding them for pretending. We're like, awesome, look at how creative they are. They're thinking all these neat thoughts and they're pretending to be in these different roles and saying things like that. In the modern era, suddenly when we have a child at 4 or 5 saying, well, I'm really the other sex, that we're going to take seriously and not put it into the same category as the sociodramatic play that it was just 5 years ago. it's something to be really, I want you to consider and think about. I'm not saying anything transphobic. I'm saying something about, sorry, my dog barked, about child development and the things that are going on concurrently with regard to sociodramatic pretend play. It's in all the areas of their lives. They can pretend like this is food. They can pretend like, there's a big crowd watching them. They can pretend all these things all of a sudden. But if they say the magic words, I'm the other sex, then now that's serious. And that's something that we should codify and do differently. It's something to think about, whether that makes sense or not. And something that I think needs to be a discussion that a lot of people are scared to have for fear of being labeled transphobic. So it's there are two different discussions to be had about adults and children, and I'm just telling you, little kids don't understand constancy yet. Like permanent things should probably not be done for a person who doesn't understand constancy yet. So, I mean, I know that what I just said might be irritating to some people, but it is something that you're taking a lifespan development class, and it's a fact of how they understand what's going on. So some family influences on gender, right? In a typical family, sons tend to be encouraged to behave in masculine ways. I mean, it's true. Fathers tend to be more warm towards their daughters than they are towards their sons. They tend to be more accepting of their daughters' behaviors, and especially more accepting of variations in their daughter's behavior. For a daughter to be interested in sort of masculine behaviors is more acceptable to the average dad than for their son to be interested in more feminine things. There's like a different way that dads look at their sons versus their daughters. They tend to be more controlling of their sons. They tend to be more directive. They tend to expect their sons to behave in a more mature way than they do their daughters at the exact same age. Like their daughters are allowed a lot more freedom and variation than they are willing to allow their sons. On average, I'm not talking about all dads. If you're a father sitting out there going, I don't do that, awesome. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about on average. Now, the media influences, I think you guys might be aware of something that people have been talking about for several decades now. The issue is that in a lot of the media that's provided to little kids, 2 to 6 year olds, most of the characters are male. And if there are female characters in there with the male characters get to be the powerful ones. They are the dominant ones. They get to be making the decisions and be authoritative, right? So we have the media giving us the message that like all the sort of adult desirable outcomes, like if you want to be in charge, I mean, you got to be male. And if you want to be a support person or, something like that, then you get to be the female. And so from very early, kids are internalizing what it means to be male and what it means to be female in our society based on these cartoons and things that are directed towards them. Their peers play a huge role. I think it's really super important for us to acknowledge that peers are probably the most important influence once kids start having access to peers. So between the 2 and 6 year phase, the peers are probably not the number one most influential factor. But by the time they're middle school, peers are it. What peers think is okay for a boy to do, or what's okay for a girl to do, is the only thing that is okay for a boy to do and a girl to do. Peers become everything as they age. Teachers, grandparents, other adults. These I like to call, if we think about Bronfenbrenner's, which I'm sorry, I don't think it was in chapter 1 anymore. I think she took that out, but. Bronfenbrenner's model says that, the people who are in our sphere of influence, who we see frequently, but we don't live with them. So that would include like teachers, that would include grandparents, they're close to us, but we don't see them all the time. These people, these adults that we come in contact with have a really big influence. They come in, they say stuff, they don't even necessarily know that they're being sexist about it, and off they go, right? And they're having an impact. I'll give you an example. My son was 2 years old, and we went on a hike, and he tried to climb this horse fence. Those ones that have like the really large diameter kind of horizontal I want to say rod, but so they're round. And so he climbed to the second one, and I was like, "Get down! What are you doing, Dad? Why are you letting him climb on that?" But just as I said that, Aspen's feet slipped off the pole that he was standing on, and so he fell to the ground flat on his back, and it knocked all of his wind out. So when I got there, his eyes were wide open. He was completely panicking. If you've ever had your wind knocked out, you know what he was feeling. So I go, "I know it's scary, but it's going to come back. You'll be able to take a breath. It's okay. Hold on, hold on. Here it comes. And he ultimately got a breath, and then of course he started crying. And I'm hugging him. I know that was scary. That was really scary, but you're okay now. And my dad goes, "He's not scared. He's just mad that he slipped." So here we have a grandparent blowing in and giving a sexist account. I might have even told this story already in a previous lecture, but a sexist account of why a boy was crying. Boys only cry because they're angry. The only appropriate emotion for a boy is anger, right? Like that's the message he gave. So this little diagram that I put here shows who the teacher is looking at. And you'll notice that first off, there's a racial difference, but there is a huge sex difference. The teachers are putting more attention on the boys in the classroom than they are on the girls in the classroom. And so just completely unconsciously, teachers are giving the impression to kids that boys are more important. And so that's something that kids can internalize. All right, let's go ahead and take a break here because that kind of concludes the socialization part. I'm going to pick up in the next segment and talk about biological factors. So I will see you in the next recording.